Good morning, everyone, and happy and blessed Sabbath to you. We just listened to some soothing music, and we thank God for the privilege of life. This morning, we have Pastor Eddie Appollis, who will be presenting on learning good intercultural skills. And so I'm correcting the title. We will not be dealing with the communication aspect, but we will definitely be dealing with learning good intercultural skills. So Pastor Eddie will take us through it. I think you're currently teaching multicultural ministry also at Heidelberg. Now, during our time, you taught missiology, and we also dealt with very interesting issues such as inculturation. I always use that term when I talk to people about mission. And so this morning, we'll focus on learning those skills and how to reach people from other cultural groups. Now, our prayer focus today, it's day 19 of the month of fasting, the month of Ramadan. It's day 19, and we are focusing on Minnesota, which currently has 5% of the entire population in that area being from the Sunni section of the global Muslim community. And so I'll be praying for the first of the three prayer focus areas. Pastor Morney Furstenberg, who will be our host this afternoon at 3, will be praying for the second one, and then Pastor Made will pray for the third one when he comes in with Pastor Dani Potgieter. At 3, we'll have Pastor Cordell Librand. So we're having a full day today. So the first prayer focus area is where we are praying for the church in Minnesota as they respond to the I Will Go initiative, that they come up with plans and strategies to reach out to their contacts, and that they make a concerted effort to reach out to our Muslim cousins in that area, because people in that area are mostly Asian and also African. So there's a large, about 40 odd percentage of the population in Minnesota is from Asian and African descent. So we are praying for the church, and we'll be praying for the church in that area. Let's bow our heads as we pray. Dear Father, thank you for the privilege of prayer. And as we intercede today for the church in Minnesota, we are praying that you will indeed assist and guide your people to see your footprints, to see where you have been, to see your activity in the lives of their Muslim neighbors, their Muslim colleagues, classmates, the folk that they engage with on a day-to-day basis, as they respond to the call where you are asking who will go, and as they say, I will go, may they be filled with your spirit, and may their hearts overflow with love for folk that are not like them, that are different to themselves. And so I pray in a special way that your people may follow your leading and your guidance as they reach out to the people in their area who need to hear the gospel of Jesus Christ. Bless them and bless our engagement today. Will you in a special way be with Pastor Eddie as he leads out, in Jesus' name. Amen. Thank you. Pastor Eddie, over to you.
Well, I want to thank you, leadership, Pastor Stander, and the rest of you who are responsible for this program. Pastor Sivo also in the background. Thank you so much for this opportunity to share. And also say greetings to you wherever you're watching. I've seen some of you watching from different parts of the world. And so greetings to you from the southern tip of Africa here in Cape Town. And I want to thank you very much for tuning in as we consider today how to reach people from different cultures with the focus on intercultural skills. I've prepared a PowerPoint, and I'm going to speak from it as we go along this morning. and I hope you will be able to follow that. I want to just say something, though, that sometimes I experience that as far as Islam is concerned, Islam is a religion. It is not a different culture or a different race. There may be many cultures who are adherents of Islam, but we need to remember that we do not approach Islam as a different culture, but that it is a religion, a different religion. And so my focus is on culture today and how to relate on the personal level. And I'm not going to speak about Islam per se, but the idea is that the principles we're sharing and the model I will be sharing with you should be useful to you on a personal level, on the level working with other cultures and with other religions. And that is just by way of introduction that I want to share that with you. I'm going to hopefully share my screen with you, and you should be able then to follow most of my presentation on the screen. I may just maybe emphasize that I prepared it largely in text form so that you're able to follow, and I hope you can see my screen. If you were in class, I would have asked you now to let me know whether you can see my screen as I'm about to take you through that. And at this time, I hope that it is very clear to you that I'm talking about intercultural skills. So if somebody can just maybe in the live chat, let me know if they can see the screen, then I can proceed and we are able to know that we are on the same page in a physical sense. All right, I'm getting from Dladla an amen in the live chat saying that yes, you can see the screen, and so I'm going to then proceed as I've mentioned to you. I would like you to follow on the screen as we talk about this very important experience that we have, and that is having an intercultural experience. Now, I would like to emphasize up front that we're going to approach culture and communication. And there I can see, you can see the screen clearly. We need to start off by asking the question, what is culture? And in order to understand that, we are all considering and thinking about our own cultures. And that is going to really be the conclusion of the matter also, is what is your culture? So I'm going to ask you just to follow with me. I have a definition that is given by Lustig and Kuster, and there are hundreds of definitions of culture, but I have found their one to be very useful. And also, I have found that it explains culture in a very good, inclusive way. So they are saying that culture is a learned set of shared interpretations about beliefs, values, norms, and social practices which affect the behaviors of a relatively large group of people. And I want to unpack that with you this morning because we're coming to culture and we're going to speak about culture quite a bit this morning. And in understanding it, it's important to just break it down a little bit. Firstly, culture is learned. It is important to note that none of us are born with a culture. You may think you've been born with a culture, but no, we usually become aware of our culture when we break something about the rules of the culture, or when you date or marry someone from a different culture. That's when we realize that culture is learned. It is something that we don't have a genetic imprint on, but that we learn it as we grow up, and as sometimes from family members, from parents, and even from friends, and sometimes even strangers will teach us about our culture. Secondly, culture is a set of shared interpretations. That means the meanings and symbols that exist in the minds of individual communicators. When those symbols are shared with others, they form a basis for culture. And culture involves beliefs, values, norms, and social practices, which we call in short BVNS. Let me just explain each. Beliefs is an idea about what is true in the world, the things we believe, that we think the world is, what is reality to us. That is, briefly, what a belief is. A value is what the culture regards as good or bad, right or wrong, fair or unfair, clean or dirty. Those are values in a culture. The norms, of course, comes again as the outward manifestations of the beliefs and values. In other words, beliefs and values are enduring, but norms can change. And norm is really that which is controlled in that environment or in the culture. What is the way or the standard things are being done? That is what we refer to as the norms. The social practices are the behaviors, and by that we even mean the behaviors which are predictable about a certain culture. Now, the line works backward. The social practices will reveal the norms and the values and the beliefs of a certain culture. So, therefore, when we say that culture involves those four, we sometimes only see how a person behaves in public. For example, when somebody kicks a dog, that may be a practice in a certain culture. Just kicking a dog when you see it, you will go back and find out that it is not such a bad thing in that culture. It's a norm. People, whenever they come across a dog, they kick the dog. And then as we contemplate that, we may actually think about what is it about this, and find that the value in that particular culture is that there is nothing wrong in kicking an animal or a dog, because they see dogs as being of little value in life. That may be interpreted by a belief about the animal world or the animal kingdom. So we can follow a person's practice in society based on their belief and their value and the norm. So I'm hoping that is explaining what culture is in a better way. And then, of course, culture affects behavior. That means the culture, nobody, and you may not realize this, but as we study this, nobody has a culture that is private. It is always held by a group of people. It may seem so obvious, but sometimes we may not take note of that. So culture is then shared by large groups of people. And in that way, we are able to guide and find our way in the behavior of people. So in essence, that is what culture is, BVNS. I think you will remember that: beliefs, values, norms, and social practices. There are three terms which are often confused and sometimes just used interchangeably. The one is cross-cultural. The other one is intercultural. And the third one is multicultural. So cross-cultural, when we speak of cross-cultural, this happens when there are only two cultures involved. And one of them is Western or Christian and superior. In other words, that's how they see themselves. So when we speak about I have a cross-cultural experience, that means you are comparing or relating with a person from another culture. All right? And that is where you may compare phenomena or experiences with people from another culture. When we speak about intercultural, then we have face-to-face interactions among people of diverse cultures. So now we're talking of two or more cultures. All right? So cross culture is from one culture to another, only two involved. Intercultural is when we speak of two or more cultures. And that is our context for this presentation here today, is that we will speak about intercultural skills. That means two or more cultures are involved. When we come to the third term, multicultural, is when we now speak of a system or group within an organization or a society or a church. Now we have a system of beliefs and behaviors that recognizes the presence of all the diverse groups. So multicultural really then means there are many cultures there that are involved. And this is then an inclusive, a system now that we talk about, not so much just the experience of different individual cultures. I hope that helps us for us in terms of our the different terminologies. I would like to share with you from this text called Ministering Cross-Culturally, an Incarnational Model for Personal Relationships. Now, Linkenfelter and Myers are the authors of this text, and they introduced a model which I want to share with you that is very useful in interpersonal and intercultural relationships. We are told that Marvin Myers developed this model in 1974, and then Linkenfelter served the people of the Pacific Islands. And when he was experiencing this different culture, him coming from the United States of America, he developed this model of tensions that he found very useful in understanding the local people. And that is what I would like to share with you. Dwayne Elmer is another author who has taken some of the work of Linkenfelter and Myers. Linkenfelter built on the model of Myers, and then Dwayne Elmer built on their model again and refined it a little further. And I have now put together in this presentation their work along with my classroom experiences with students, as well as my experiences as a pastor, as a minister, and relating to people of different cultures. So what you're getting here this time is to learn a little bit about how different cultures operate. There's a key word I want you to take note of, because the authors speak about this and we will see it as well. And that is a continuum. Continuum. That is like a line, and the tensions we're going to speak about, you need to think of them as being on a continuum. That means point A and point B. If the one side is more on point A, the other side will depend on different points between A and B. And the six tensions we're going to deal with today, each of them cause some tension. Depending on the continuum, if your A and your B are far apart between the tensions, you will have greater tension. So the six tensions I would like to share with you in the next few minutes are time orientation and event orientation, dichotomistic and holistic, crisis orientation and non-crisis orientation, task orientation and person orientation, status focus and achievement focus, conceal vulnerability and expose vulnerability. So I hope you're ready to go with me. As I've mentioned, the tensions are on the line. People are on different points. I wish you could do the test. There is a little questionnaire that I could let you have and do. And you can find out what your score is in terms of these orientations. For our purposes today, we will speak as if you know already where you are, or at least have some idea which tension for you is greater as we look at these six tensions. So I'm going to start with the first one, which is time orientation and event orientation. And in each one, I will share with you what it consists of, and thereafter a little story or illustration, and then a discussion question, and then some biblical perspective, and lastly, intercultural skills in dealing with that. So I'm going to go with the six then here for our purposes today. So starting off with time orientation versus event orientation. Please note that you, pardon me, will be either a time-orientated or event-orientated person. The greater the distance between those two, the more tension exists. So somebody who's time-orientated, they have a concern for punctuality and amount of time expended on doing something. They have very careful allocation of time to achieve the maximum within set limits. And they are tightly scheduled and do goal-directed activities. In other words, they will say that I'm going to take 30 minutes for this project or for this task and not longer, and want to complete it within that time. And then they reward themselves as an incentive for completing it in that time. Like a parent may say to a child, if you complete your homework in 30 minutes, I will then have something for you. And people who are very time orientated, they've placed a lot of emphasis on dates and history. For example, they're the ones who will remember wedding anniversaries or birth dates and where they were 10 years ago and how much of the family has come through different stages and the history of a culture or group. They emphasize those dates. Contrasting to that, a person who has an event orientation, they again have concern for details of the event regardless of the time required. So by that we mean they may not be on time at an event. They are more concerned, will the event happen? Will everybody be ready? And will things work out well? They also spend an excessive consideration of a problem until it is solved. So no, doesn't matter how long it takes to complete something or to solve the problem. The time is not so important. That's your event-oriented person. They don't have tightly scheduled goal-directed activities. Instead, they have a let come what may approach. Let's see what happens. We are here now. Let's see how things go. And they stress on completing the event as a reward in itself. So whatever time it takes and energy it takes to complete something, that is a reward. It doesn't matter about the time and what comes after a time period. And those who are in a culture with an event orientation, they emphasize the present experience rather than the past or the future. I'm not worried so much about where we will be or things the culture or group will do in 6 months from now. Time is not as important. So a person may have both these orientations. However, the greater score or greater difference there is, in other words, if you are a very time-oriented person, you're going to have greater frustration and tension when you work with a culture that is event-orientated. All right? And for some, the experience is very frustrating because you come from two different orientations. I want to share just a story with you. The pastor who was very time orientated, he rushed to be on time for a church service at one of his churches. The members of this church were mostly time orientated. His wife, though, is more event orientated and often struggles to get to the car at the agreed time. She feels it is more important to be at church for the experience, irrespective of the time of arrival. The tendency for the pastor is to pressurize his wife to get done so that they can be on time at church. The journey to church is often filled with blame and frustration as the couple try to find common ground. And then when one member of the church members passes a remark to the extent of, "Late again, pastor," he just looked at his wife and wondered, when will he be respected as the one who keeps time? Quietly, they greeted the members with smiles and hugs and pretends that nothing happened on the way to church. I want you to consider this question, and unfortunately, we won't have time to discuss it. But concerning your focus on time and event, please take a mental inventory of how many clocks are in your house or your place of residence. How many of them are set to the same time exactly? Further, check how many wrist watches do you have and what would be their total estimated monetary value. What does this say to you about your time orientation? So that is the first tension. We want to talk about time versus event. I want to bring the biblical perspective for you to this now. Jewish culture during the life of Christ was predominantly event-orientated. And the evidence presented in the gospel suggests little or no concern for punctuality or schedule. Jesus lived and ministered in a manner common among the Jews. However, when time became important in God's plan, then Jesus pressed into action. For example, in John 4, when he rebuked the disciples for neglecting the pressing needs of the people. Now, there are some intercultural skills that come from this time event orientation that we need to take home today. Please be aware that even people from similar cultures may have different attitudes to time. Therefore, attempts at cross-cultural communication may be characterized by hostility and strife when the orientation of an entire culture conflicts with that of the missionary or the person working with them. And so often people who are so different become frustrated with one another and may even reject one another. Therefore, one must consider the demands of an entire culture versus the personal preference of a participant. So you may have to look at the culture that you're working with in order to be effective, because one person or one person's preference may not necessarily be the way the whole culture operates. To be effective, one must adapt to such differences in the view of time. And of course, remember, there are individuals who are at variance with the pattern of the whole. And unfortunately, many well-meaning Christians label the discordant person as rebellious and carnal. The critics may fail to see these same persons may be out of step because they have taken time to help their neighbor, like in the story of the Good Samaritan in Luke chapter 10, where we find that the person helped somebody along the way and therefore was late for his appointment. Our way with time may not be God's way. In fact, no culture has God's priorities, for in God's scheme, the emphasis on time and event exists together in complete harmony. An important key to effective cross-cultural ministry is an incarnational attitude. That is where you live in and through the experience of the people toward time and event. Then, in short, we must adapt to the time and event priorities of people with whom we work. I want to say that it is not easy. And as Dwayne Elmer points out, that neither value, time or event, is better than the other. Neither value is more godly. So I'm not proposing, and he's not proposing, that you should strive to be more time orientated or strive to be more event orientated, because different cultures may prefer one value over the other, but may move back and forth on the continuum. I mean, most of us, even if we are time orientated, if our needs are satisfied, we can easily adjust and even enjoy someone who is event orientated, and vice versa. If I fail to start where the other person is, that is maybe event orientated, I may be perceived as insensitive or uncaring, which strains the relationship. The person with the servant heart will try to discern where the other person is on these cultural differences and enter that frame of reference as a basis for building relationships. And I think that is what we were hearing last night from our speaker as well, in building relationships, in moving from what is common ground to higher ground, as he explained to us in the previous presentation, that we need to build those relationships, because for most of the part, or most part, these values are just matters of difference, not matters of right and wrong. So that's where we leave off time and event orientation. I want to move on to our second one, and that is dichotomistic and holistic. This is the second tension, and depending where you are, we are looking at judgment. How do different cultures arrive at judgment? How do you make a judgment on an individual basis or as a culture or as a group? And Lincolnfeld and Myers point out that people do it in one of two ways, either dichotomistic or holistic. And di, meaning two, you will notice that judgments that they make are either black or white, right or wrong. There's no middle ground. There's no maybe it is either right or it is wrong. Security comes from feeling that one is right and fits into a particular role or society. And information and experiences are systematically organized. So those who come from a culture that is dichotomistic, everything is very organized. You can see what is expected in that culture. You can understand it. It is clear when you interact with people from that culture, you can see it's very organized. On the other side, we have holistic orientation. Here, judgments are open ended to consider the whole situation. Remember, dichotomistic, it's either black or white. So when judgment is made, there is not a big consideration of other factors. For a holistic person or culture, security comes from multiple interactions within the whole of society. One is secure if one is confined to particular roles or categories. And here it seems with holistic that information and experiences are seemingly disorganized. So a person who has a holistic approach to life will often seem that they're not sure and don't have structure and organization. But that is because in a dichotomistic, everything is very clear cut, very organized, right or wrong. There's no gray areas. So the story is told of a disciplinary case of a teenage pregnancy which was brought before a multicultural church meeting. The young couple admitted to wrongdoing but decided not to get married and keep the baby. The church was divided on the issue of discipline or judgment. Some members felt that the couple should be given a written warning and moral support because the male came from a dysfunctional family. The majority of the church members at the meeting, however, decided to remove both of them from church membership according to the church's policy. As a result of this decision, which was made on dichotomistic grounds, the couple never returned to that particular church again since their disfellowship becoming off the church records or membership. And so there we have that illustrated by the judgment made on a dichotomistic ground. A question for you to consider with this tension is, does your culture have a clean separation of work life and personal life? How does that work? How might it look if such categories were blurred so that there was not a strong distinction between work life and personal life? Again, I ask you to consider that because we may not have time to discuss that on our platform here today. But looking at dichotomistic and holistic perspectives, let's look at the biblical perspective next. The challenge facing ministers is to learn and think in accordance with the mindset of the host culture. Be ordinary. Jesus was, according to Matthew 13, and we are advised and encouraged to master the content of the people you are working with, like Jesus. Jesus also discerned the working of the minds of the people. He mastered their culture. The gospel writing suggests that Jesus utilized right hemisphere, pictorial, concrete, holistic, and analogic structures. And so the objects Jesus chose as analogies were common, everyday aspects of Jewish culture, familiar to everyone who heard his message. He spoke about sheep and coins and banquets, etc. Jesus also focused on the issues of his day to teach spiritual truth. Example, Matthew 9, and about fasting. Jesus also employed the personal object lesson, and the impact of the gospel narratives is concrete and holistic. So, looking at what we have from the Bible, we see this interplay of dichotomistic and holistic, which brings us to the intercultural skills we need to adopt. We must realize the differences of people's thought patterns. How do they think? So a missionary entering another culture must realize that people evaluate others in different ways. We see each person as displaying a specific role. The way we think predisposes how we will judge others. So, what you think of people in that culture will also tell us how we will judge them. One of the biggest problems in our families, in our churches and missions, is that we often insist that others think and judge in the same way we do. And that is where a big problem comes in. But I am going to leave that second tension with you. We have looked at time and event, dichotomistic and holistic. Now, thirdly, I would like you to consider with me crisis orientation versus non-crisis orientation. Let me remind you, as I've said earlier, this must be seen on a continuum. That means like a line. All right, and where some people may be on crisis orientation, if they have a high score in that, they're going to have a lot of tension when their culture or the rest of the people who they work with are on the other end of the continuum with a non-crisis orientation. There are many who are in the middle. They have a bit of both. They are not so extreme. For them, it's easier to mingle and to meet with people of other cultures. But those who have a high score and a strong orientation towards either, it's for them a little harder to deal with different cultures, different people, and even in their own family. Let's look at crisis orientation and non-crisis orientation. Those from a crisis orientation, they anticipate a crisis. They emphasize planning before a crisis happens. They seek quick resolution to avoid ambiguity, and they will repeatedly follow a single authority, a pre-planned procedure, almost like a fire escape plan. They will also seek expert advice. Whereas on the other side, a non-crisis orientated person, they downplay the possibility of crisis. Hey, what crisis? Where is there? I don't know about a crisis. They focus on the actual experience. What's happening now? Pardon me. This is where I'm seeing life. As I am today, I don't see any crisis. You guys are talking about a storm that's coming. But for the non-crisis person, they avoid taking action. They delay response. They're the kind, when they see a fire burning in the veld, they will wait if that fire comes closer and closer to their home or house. And when it's there nearby, maybe on their fence, when they will take action. They will seek ad hoc solutions from multiple available options. In other words, a person who's non-crisis orientation will not go and look at what do the authorities say about this. They will think, but what do other people say about a problem or a situation? And they distrust expert advice. They think, no, it is not going to be like that. I don't think they know what they're talking about. And so the person who has a non-crisis orientation really just deals with crises as it comes along. And they don't spend time or energy or even a thought sometimes at being warned about something that must still happen or is going to happen. For example, if you look at the COVID-19 pandemic, here you can see it very clearly played out in the countries, in the cultures, and even in individual lives. Those who have a crisis orientation, they try and look for a vaccine or tell people how to avoid the crisis, how to wear masks and social distancing and washing hands as a way to anticipate this crisis as it comes and to plan for it. Those who don't have a crisis orientation, in other words, a non-crisis, they're saying, where is the virus? It has not reached our family. It doesn't seem to be a big threat in our culture or even our family or group. And so they avoid taking action. And you can see this. They distrust expert advice. And we have this very same orientations now playing out in the world and in our country and in our culture and even in our families. Crisis versus non-crisis. Let me share with you a story again, or an illustration about a crisis, non-crisis orientation. A church had a small leak in the roof of the building. After some of the men notified the church board about it, nothing was done to repair it. Later, during the autumn months, the concerned white brethren of that church added their voice and stated that the leaking roof be fixed before the serious rain season starts. However, many of the other black church leaders felt that the leak was not a major problem because the rainy season had not started yet. It was only when the rain came down in torrents and leaked into the church that some discussion started. Yet, no work was done on the roof. Eventually, the roof repairs were undertaken. But now this was during the rainy season in winter, after buckets were placed on the church pews to prevent water damage. The work took much longer than because they had to wait for the dry days to get onto the church's roof. Needless to say, the repairs were of a more exorbitant price also. So, crisis versus non-crisis orientation. A discussion question for you to consider. A well-known pastor often said to his church leaders, "Do not let your poor planning become my emergency." Do you think that that statement is a fair comment to make in a multicultural setting? Why or why not? You chew on that as I move on to the biblical perspective of crisis and non-crisis. Many missionaries, pastors, and lay workers tend to judge issues only in spiritual terms and fail to see cultural dimensions. Now, Jesus often demonstrated a non-crisis orientation, while the Jewish leaders had a crisis orientation. Jesus responded with questions rather than with answers, and with parables that rather raised issues than brought resolution. Examples of Jesus in non-crisis situation in Luke 20 verse 3, for example, where Jesus was sleeping on a boat in a storm, and he delayed en route to the home of Jairus, whose daughter was dying, and Lazarus, who died as well. Jesus seemed to have taken a non-crisis approach there. For the Christian laborer, the challenge is to have an unwavering, declarative commitment to the gospel and an open, questioning, non-crisis orientated lifestyle and ministry. So that's what the writers are really proposing to us in this case, that you should almost have both orientations. 2 Timothy 4 verse 2, we have a crisis orientation needed for preaching, but a non-crisis orientation needed in personal life and ministry. I hope you are still with me wherever you are watching this, as we're talking about the 6 tensions in dealing with people of different cultures. And we are busy with the third one here that deals with crisis and non-crisis orientation. The Bible makes allowances for responding to a crisis and allowing nature to take its course where the situation allows. There is no biblical imperative to seek clear-cut solutions and contingency plans where God is in control. Human planning must acknowledge the limitation of human wisdom and allow room for divine intervention in a crisis. Now, let me share something with you, which is not in my notes, but that I just remembered now. A person who is of a crisis orientation, in other words, they who always plan to not have a crisis in their life. They anticipate the crisis, they solve it before the crisis appears or happens. Such a person and even such a culture see less of God's intervention in their lives, because divine intervention often happens when we are in a crisis or through a crisis. But the human planning and the human wisdom evading the crisis sometimes diminishes the human, or rather the divine intervention. But just a thought to think about. I would like you to consider the intercultural skills of tension crisis versus non-crisis. Communication. Communication is the key to preventing a crisis from getting out of hand. Efficient when it is done well in advance. So if you are working with a culture that is crisis orientated, the communication is important there. It's important also to understand how a different culture views a crisis and its severity, because what to you may be a crisis may for that culture not be one at all. You may see, for example, signs in the nature, in the weather patterns, in global warming that tells you there's a crisis coming. And to you, it may be quite a severe crisis. But the culture who you work with may see those things as everyday things and say it will just blow away one day and it's going to get better, or it is not so severe. So whatever the crisis, people are more important, and one should maintain one's composure for a healthy future working relationship. By that we mean, if you are crisis oriented and you see a crisis coming and you want to downplay it, you want to prepare for it, and you're working with a culture or a group that is on a non-crisis orientation, it may be very easy to force to want those people to work with you and to not care about the relationship as long as the crisis is averted. But whatever the crisis, we must remember, people are more important. No particular culture has a superior crisis response than another culture. We may sometimes think, yeah, that culture seems to be doing very well with crises. That is how we should all be. But we are learning that nobody has a superior response. We must always consider others better than ourselves, even when we find ourselves in intercultural. The writer here, Lincoln Felter, says that working with the Yap people in the South Pacific Islands, he once saw a storm coming and said to them that that storm is going to do great damage. They need to move the houses and buildings that are so close to the sea and shoreline. However, to the local people with a different orientation, it was no problem. They said, we'll see. When the crisis comes, then we'll move the houses. Well, a storm did come and threatened to wash away the homes built right on the shoreline. They then got together and moved their houses knee deep in the water during the crisis. But Lincoln Felter, the author, said he had to still maintain relationships with the people, even though he wanted to tell them, I told you so. That is a strong intercultural skill to manage. Well, there we are. We have reached halfway mark. I hope you are still connected and following on this very important seminar that we have here. I hope that you are able to see the next screen, which is task orientation versus person orientation. We have looked at the first three tensions, and the first one was time versus event, and then we had dichotomistic versus holistic, and then the third one, crisis versus non-crisis. Now we come to task orientation versus person orientation. I hope somebody is recognizing themselves with these orientations, where you're fitting in, starting to get a picture, an image of what you are like and how you will work with other cultures. Somebody who is from a task orientation, they focus on the task and the principles. They find satisfaction in the achievement of goals. They seek even friends with similar goals. and they will accept loneliness and social deprivation for the sake of personal achievements. In other words, they will stay away from a party or from a function because they have a task that they want to complete. Oh, the person who is from a person orientation, they focus on person and relationship, not so much on the task. They find satisfaction, and let me add, energy in interaction when they are with people. Oh, they get just energized. They feel I am with it. And in fact, I must admit, just here, by the way, during COVID-19, these are the people who suffer more than those who are from a task orientation. By that, because we are not able to be with large groups of people and have to isolate ourselves. A person orientation seeks friends who are group orientated. They like to be with others who also like to be with groups and people, the sanguines of society. They deplore loneliness. They sacrifice personal achievements for group interaction. So if the choice is given to be with people or to pursue that master's degree or study or even just some achievement in life, they may sacrifice it. I'd say, I'll come back to that. That's your person orientated. So you can see here a definite tension between task and person. Which one are you more like as we speak today? Tell you a little bit about a story there again, just illustrating the point as we move on. It was Tuesday, and the local church pastor was trying to focus on his sermon for the upcoming church service over the weekend. However, his preparation was interrupted by a call from a concerned church member. Her teenage son attempted to commit suicide after his longtime girlfriend left him for his best friend. The pastor left his desk and went to speak to the troubled youth in hospital. However, it became apparent to him that the problem did not have a quick fix. After a few brief sessions, he realized that he cannot do justice to both. That is, finishing the task of writing his sermon and spending time with the family. He chose to spend time with the youth through counseling that week, but he did not preach as well at the church service for lack of preparation. Task or person-oriented? I have a question for you to consider under the discussion questions. I'm bringing stories and illustrations from the church setting for those who are in that setting. The church pastor is about ready to start the board meeting of his local multicultural church. The announced time of 9 o'clock has come, but there are only 20% of the members present. They are all from the same cultural background. Without the quorum, that means the number of people needed to start the meeting, more than 50% plus one of the members to start the meeting, he is torn between waiting for the rest and starting the meeting late, or starting on time with those who are present at the meeting. Applying what you have learned from these orientations of task and person, what would you advise the pastor to do? Please motivate your answer. And I'm hoping some of you can discuss this further in your own time. But let's go to the biblical perspective of task and person orientation. The Bible shows Jesus meeting personal needs at whatever time they occurred, feeding the 5,000 even when he was tired. The principle? The Christian who is both task-orientated and time-orientated rarely has time for personal ministry. In Luke chapters 4 to 9, Jesus gave priority to people in need on 16 occasions, and 4 occasions to a task to be performed. So clearly, taking from the Gospels, we can see whether Jesus was more task-orientated or person-oriented. authors tells us that we cannot hold office hours for the people to whom Christ has called us to minister. We must adjust our time schedules. People should take priority over task in ministry. And Christ gave perfect attention to persons and did the task that were essential. So some lessons for us, some intercultural skills here. Although we cannot reach perfection, we can strive for the lesser goal of becoming incarnate in the culture of those we serve, becoming a part of that culture where we serve. In essence, we need to move from a position of comfort to the goals of the culture to which we are sent. And by that we mean your comfort position is where your orientation lies. You may be more task orientated. But if you're working in a culture or with a culture that is more person orientated, we need to move from that comfort. It may not be so comfortable for you, who is a person's people, who love to be with people, to focus just on the task and to get the task done when it requires. It may not be your comfort position, your default position, but we need to move from that position to the goals of the culture to which we are sent. On the other hand, if we are working with certain cultures like the Chinese or Japanese, who place great value on achievement and orientation to value people over productivity, may seem disrespectful. So it depends which culture you are in that you need to adapt, and especially if you are at variance, if you are different to the culture you're working with, that will bring the great attention. It's easier if you are a task-oriented person and you're working with a culture that is task-oriented. You will fit in much easier and find it less troublesome to work with the people of that culture. Well, we're coming to the second last one here of our presentation today. I'm glad that you are tuned in and that you are watching on the social media platforms as we look at intercultural skills in working with people. Then we come to the next tension, status focus versus achievement focus. So in status focus, prestige is ascribed to the person, whereas in achievement focus, prestige is attained. It's not given to you. You work for it. So in status focus, personal identity is determined by formal credentials of birth and rank. The amount of respect one receives is permanently fixed. Attention focuses on those with high social status in spite of any personal failings that they may have. Now, you can think here of some very prominent figures in some of our cultures. It doesn't matter what they do, they still have status, all right, and respect. And some of us cannot understand, especially if you're from an achievement focus, how is it possible that people will still have respect for that person? Because it is permanently fixed. An individual is expected to play his or her role and to sacrifice to attain higher rank. And people associate only with their social equals. Doesn't matter what accomplishments they have, as long as we're in the same social level. That is how status focus orientations work. But those who have an achievement focus, and cultures who are this way put together, personal identity is determined by one achievement. So in other words, you become a greater or better person based on your achievements. The amount of respect one receives varies with one's accomplishment and failures. Attention focuses on personal performance. So when you no longer perform, when you don't accomplish anything, you will not have prestige. This, by the way, deals with our self-worth. How do we see a person's self-worth? So for some, self-worth comes from your status, and for others, it comes from your achievement. An individual is extremely self-critical and makes sacrifices in order to accomplish ever greater deeds. So in order to have self-worth, they may feel that I'm not doing enough, I haven't accomplished enough in life, I need to sacrifice more in order to have more prestige and more self-worth. And people associate with those of equal accomplishments regardless of their background. So it doesn't matter where you come from or what you've done in your life, that people will associate with you, those who are of an achievement focus. This brings us to a story on this. When I was growing up as a young person in the 1980s in Stellenbosch, a place here in the Western Cape where I'm from, there was a lot of tension between the educated and the less educated people. This class difference often exhibited itself in church and in church meetings where the church leaders were elected. And the sentiment that was expressed those years was the church should be led by those who have formal education, like the teachers and those who have gone to study further, and that those with little or no formal education who never finished their high school matric or high school schooling, that they should be led by the others. And of course, the apartheid policies of the government at the time made this racial divide and class difference even more apparent. It became even more so apparent to me that the texture of your hair or the color of your skin determined whom you should associate with. As this was practiced in the church as well, it was very humbling to see that you may possess great academic qualifications, but you may not be regarded as a peer or as an equal because of your social background. And then in other circles again, people were accepted because of their accomplishments, regardless of their background. And this I saw as quite a difficult challenge during those years. But we are talking about status versus achievement focus. So the question for you, do you feel that belonging to a multicultural church enhances or it depresses one's human conception of self-worth? Please justify your answer. All right? We're talking about self-worth. How do you see self-worth? Does it come through being a status focus or does it come through being achievement focus? It is interesting that Jesus rejects both orientations as being inadequate. Jesus rebukes those who find their self-esteem in ascribed rank and public honors. He admonishes people to take lower places rather than the higher ones. And about entertaining guests in one's home, Jesus advises against inviting only friends, relatives, and people of our social class or culture. You read it there in Luke 14. The career that Jesus prescribes to his followers is one of service. The biblical estimate of self-worth is summed up in Romans 3, verses 10 to 12, where we are told that no one is righteous. That's where we need to consider our self-worth. So coming to the intercultural skills, each cross-cultural worker must be aware of their own conception of personal identity and self-worth. How do you see your identity? What is your identity? And how is that tied to your self-worth? Each culture defines its own paths to recognition and self-fulfillment. Human attempts to find identity and self-worth divide us from one another and result in humiliation and subjugation of the weak. We need to recognize that self-worth comes through neither ascribed nor achieved prestige, and that one must be a servant in the pattern set by Christ. See, this runs across what we find in communities and in cultures today who go with those two tensions. The requirements of day-to-day living should compel us to acknowledge and respect the cultural standards around us. We must be sensitive, both to who we and others are and to what we and others do. So that is then tension number 5. If we go back, we will see that we have looked at the first group of tensions that we have started off with time and event, and finding out where you are. And we've come all the way through now to number 5, status versus achievement. I want to end of our presentation. I hope you're still there and connected and following as I come to the last one, which is conceal vulnerability and expose vulnerability. People and cultures who conceal vulnerability have an avoidance of error and failure of self-image at all cost. The emphasis is on the quality of the event. They have a reluctance to go beyond one's recognized limits or to enter the unknown. They have a denial of culpability, of withdrawal from activities in order to hide weaknesses and shortcomings. They also have a refusal to entertain alternate views or to accept criticism. There's also vagueness regarding their personal life. In other words, you don't hear them talk about their personal life. Those who expose vulnerability, they have relative unconcern about error and failure. They will tell you what are some of the sins and errors they've made as a young person. They will tell you what they did last week that was a failure. They will emphasize on the completion of an event. They also have a willingness to push beyond one's limits and enter the unknown and see what does it have to offer. They have a ready admission of culpability, of guilt, of their weaknesses, and of their shortcomings. They will tell you, I make mistakes all the time. They have an openness to alternate views and criticism. And they have a willingness to talk freely about personal life. So in the story that I bring to you, there once was a minister of a large church who seldom, if ever, talked about his failures and weaknesses in the fear that people might know some weak cracks exist in his model. He was consistently vague about his experiences in the ministry. So even after 3 years in that pastoral district, most members knew very little about their pastor's private life. Some members were upset about this because they felt they didn't quite know more than just what he's talking about up front as their leader. And others made some stereotypical comments by saying, oh, all the people from his culture are like that. They always hide things and you don't know if you can trust them because they are so secretive. As this minister has never studied multicultural ministry before, he felt that they were highly critical of him and his family and asked to be moved to another appointment. All right? The discussion question for you: how were your concepts of vulnerability shaped by your family and upbringing? And how were they shaped by your culture? There are certain families who have encouraged children to expose vulnerability, to share about their weaknesses, and others maybe not. What was your experience? It is interesting from a biblical perspective here that both orientations have positive and negative aspects. In Luke 14, there is wisdom in guarding your weakness, but it is foolish also not to consider your weaknesses. The Jewish leaders were unwilling to reveal their vulnerability, and they found it a great source of strength. In 2 Corinthians 12, it tells us that there is wisdom in exposing one's vulnerabilities, a great source of strength. On the other hand, a society that encourages a willingness to expose one's vulnerability and to risk failures is subject to pitfalls of self-righteousness. By exposing the weakness of others, we may develop this condescending attitude toward them. The biblical mandate does not support one at the exclusion of the other. In the Jewish culture, private messages were often sent by intermediaries. That is, for example, when the centurion asked Jesus to heal his servant. Exposing the weaknesses of others by confrontation can destroy our witness and evidence of God's love. So we need to be careful how we look at these tensions between those who are willing to expose vulnerability and those who are not. The Christian worker must be aware of his own orientation, unwillingness to adapt, leads to walls of rejection and impairs the work of the body of Christ. We need to have a sensitivity to other cultures, for arrogance only breeds contempt. I've discovered that when you make altar calls or the decision calls in a church service, that you may need to use a variety of responses, such as raising one's hand or writing on a decision card. This is to accommodate those who want to not expose vulnerability, but yet want to come to Jesus for spiritual help. All right? Because of our time, I need to move on as we start to wrap up. There are the 6 tensions then that I've shared with you. And I'm asking you to consider where you are, because that is the starting point. And as we have looked at time versus event orientation, dichotomistic versus holistic, crisis versus non-crisis, task versus person, status focus versus achievement focus, conceal vulnerability and expose vulnerability. What is your score like? What would it be like, your combo of tensions? Are you time, dichotomistic, all the first ones? Or are you in the group of all the second ones, event, holistic, non-crisis? Or do you have a mixture where you are maybe time orientated but non-crisis? And those are then the points for you to consider as we conclude here today. My last slide comes as a summary slide of all what has been said in learning intercultural skills. It boils down to these 2 things. One, know your own culture. Know the beliefs, the values, the norms, and the social practices of your culture. And then secondly, learn the beliefs, the value, the norms, and social practices of other cultures. I thank you very much for your attention, and I hope what you have heard today will be useful to you in dealing with people of other cultures, other races, and religion as we look at this intercultural skill presentation today. I thank you so much for your time and concentration. Over to you, Pastor Patrick.
Thank you very much, Pastor Eddie. I think we've learned a lot today and we have a lot to reflect on. I'm hoping to get the instrument that you referred to, the little questionnaire, so that we can share it with our folks and we can assess ourselves so that we know where we are on the continuum, whether we are in the first group or in the second group. Maybe anybody who wants to ask something or say something. I've seen some appreciation expressed, and some folks have indicated that they are really learning, and we are all learning together. Where folk are really dealing with the whole idea of us focusing on people more than on the task. And I think that was highly and really appreciated, that we need to think about that. We need to think about that and how we deal with people, because people are really important. You also use the word incarnational, and I think for me a take home, as Pastor Ruben would say, the barakat, when you get the your parcel after you visited and you get your parcel and you go home and they say they had the barakat salvat, so you get the barakat and you go. Actually, for those who know where that comes from, it comes from an Arabic word meaning blessing. So and in Cape Town, people actually use that word to talk about your doggy bag, if you please, or your parcel that you take home after visiting. And so the barakat we are getting here is that people are very important, and we need to really think about what we are doing. And I need to acknowledge our friends from Saudi Arabia. I saw Sister Stain all the way from Mossel Bay working over in Saudi Arabia, and also Sister Calvert working over in Saudi Arabia. One day we'll ask her to share, we'll ask Sister Calvert to share that interesting story that was published in one of our missions magazines of one of the patients at the hospital, and where the child responded to her humming, uh, Jesus loves me. This I know. If I remember the song correctly, she'll correct me.
Mm.
But it's a
That's right.
very
Yes.
interesting story. That's the song. And remember, they're
Yes.
working in a Muslim country, and she used to hum the song, and the child would respond to the song. And the mother asked that she record that tune so that she could play it when the child would become irritable and the child would cry. And that's a miracle that God performed right there, because our people are working on the mission fields, and they need to be on the lookout for where God is creating opportunities. Thank you very much, Pastor Eddie. I see our folks are really appreciating what has been shared with us, and we really appreciate you coming along to help us and to share some skills with us that we will definitely implement. Let's bow our heads as we pray and as we get
Pastor,
ready. Yes,
Pastor, just maybe
Pastor
before
Eddie?
we pray, you could
Okay.
maybe share my email address for those who would like to do that questionnaire. There is somebody who does it on computer, and for a very small fee, a few rands, they are willing to do that and give a full printout to the person. So they can either get in touch with me or with you, and I can then send the details, or rather give them the link of where
Mm,
they can have it done. It's another pastor who has taken this course further and has actually developed a seminar, a rather questionnaire online, and they can then get a printout of their six tensions where they are. But he will probably just do it for a small fee, as it's something extra that he would do. But that is my email address at the bottom of the screen. They can get
mhm.
in touch with me, and I'll put them in touch with that link, and they will then know which of the tensions they are more likely to be, and it will be even a further learning curve as we
Yeah.
continue to grow.
Thank you, Pastor. I'll also request the link so that we can share it with our pastors and our members through our emailing list, and then we'll put together all the resources. We really appreciate that, Pastor Eddie. It will help us so that we are actually able to implement what we are doing here. Because when you come to a summit, we have to leave here with something in hand, going back to where we are, to implement what we've learned. Thank you so much. Let's pause for a word of prayer. Dear Lord, thank you for this great initiative that you've put in place. Thank you for Pastor Eddie's willingness to come along and to share um, skills and to help us to understand ourselves a bit better, and also to look at other people through different eyes. It's our prayer that you will continue to bless him and each one of us as we spend this Sabbath with you and with loved ones. Help us, Lord, to remember what we have learned, and help us to reflect on these things, and may it become an integral part of what we do as we try to do mission and to try on go on God's errands. Bless us, we ask in Jesus' name. Amen. Thank you very much,
Amen.
and we'll see you during our divine service engagement.
Greetings.